And I think we're ready to begin.
I can't figure out why that white line is right across my screen.
Yeah, we tried to figure that out earlier today, but we couldn't. But I think we'll have to live with it for now.
Can't believe it.
Okay,
It's as
so
old as I am anyway.
yeah, so we're going to begin now. Our speaker tonight is Dan Bragg, and Dan's somebody I've known since we were kids together, friends in grade school. And sometimes we would sleep out in a treehouse with some other guys in our neighborhood. And, his farm had joined our farm. And so sometimes we get together in the woods to chase heifers that cross the fence and sort them out and make sure they are on each side, the correct side of the fence.
Or sometimes we'd try to take yours if they were a better looking ones and try to give you ours. But that didn't really go over that well. So
Peter, we were wondering where some of those good heifers went, right, Peter?
yeah. Well, they get stuck in the swamp when you pull them out. So
also, Dan and I were when we were in high school, we used to retreat to the Kellogg Hubbard Library after a day of classes, and we'd have vigorous and spirited debates about politics and religion and philosophy and everything imaginable. So I know that Dan could have a lot to say. So I couldn't think of anyone better to start us off on our virtual series of meetings than Dan. One thing I should note is that since we're historical societies here, Calais and East Montpelier, that I might mention that this meeting itself is probably a historic event. It represents the first time that we have tried to have a virtual meeting over Zoom. So that will, this is a first. I think I'll let Dan, I think his presentation will tell you all the things you want to know. So we'll switch to Dan at this point. And take it away.
okay, thank you. I wanted to start out just by introducing my family.
I should be done by then.
My wife Martha, who's been a full collaborator in all of our efforts to set up historic site markers.
I opened the garage up and turned the light on, so you know.
Son Dylan, who is taking leave from Positive Pi this winter to take classes, and Lisa, who is studying at Columbia University in climate change.
Nice to meet you guys.
So it turns out that public speaking is not necessarily my forte, and so rather than have me run off in a panic, we decided to turn it into a collaborative family effort. So we have an agenda.
Somebody needs to mute.
So I'm a rather pathetic tech support person, but I might be a little better than Dan is, so I'm gonna try to serve that role tonight. And if anything goes wrong, it's not his fault. So we're gonna start with a PowerPoint presentation that has a number of images that might also cause you to have questions later.
Right, and if anybody wants to interrupt the talk to ask a question, that's a good thing to do. And yeah, because that helps round out the whole thing.
Be good if I could actually. All right.
Okay, so I'll read the agenda, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start out with I'm going to read an introduction to our effort out loud. Then we're going to go to the Upham experience. We're going to talk about historic marker applications. We're going to talk about a little bit about Clarence Fitch and William Slade together. And then we're going to consider William Philip Stafford, who is a little known Barrie resident who championed African-American rights. He was born in 1861. And he actually was with John Dewey and W.E.B. Du Bois and others in the founding of the NAACP. So anyway, so I'm going to just start out by reading my introduction. And if somebody can't hear, or if there's if I'm reading too fast or whatever, just make a noise and I'll change direction. One of my key motivations for investigating Vermont and American history involved family politics. My family has been quite politically divided for some time, and true to that period, my father and I used to get into seriously heated and overwrought arguments about the morality of the Vietnam War and other related subjects. Over time, it began to occur to me that neither one of us knew what we were talking about, or at least had enough knowledge to be taking the strident positions we were taking. Our information was inadequate, and many views were based on hearsay, supposition, or a grab bag of half-read articles. And because we have a founding and a constitution, political positions frequently required historical context to satisfy our distinctive American system. For example, early on in my investigations, I discovered that James Madison, who wrote all of the original amendments to the Constitution, had wanted a constitutional amendment allowing conscientious objectors to avoid direct military service. It also came to my attention that there had been an informal but very vigorous anti-war movement against the Mexican-American War during the 1840s. The rhetorical style employed by many of these early war dissenters was no less strident than that employed by Vietnam War protesters. Why had I never known these things? And how could these insights have altered our perceptions of what was and wasn't a person's patriotic duty? James Madison didn't get his amendment, and the posture taken against the Mexican-American War wasn't identical to the Vietnam War protest. But in my opinion, both had the capacity to inform and change the character of disagreements during the 1960s and 1970s. I have included on two of the history markers that the persons being commemorated were opponents of the Mexican-American War, to give those of us who have adopted an anti-war posture some helpful historical company. On into my experience, I read the book George Perkins Marsh, Prophet of Conservation by David Lowenthal. At one point in the book, Lowenthal is listing off the members of the Vermont delegation to Congress. Vermont had 4 US representatives at this point, and I ran across the phrase, the ardent abolitionist and US Senator William Upham from Montpelier. Interestingly, as a longtime resident of Montpelier, I had never heard of William Upham, or that he had owned one of the most elegant buildings in town, the Inn at Montpelier on Main Street. I spent a bunch of time pondering the revelation and cogitating on the fact that Vermont, as the whitest state in the country, has had a sometime reputation for harboring racist attitudes. I decided the community should know there had been at least one important abolitionist in our midst. I decided to petition the city to have a pocket park named after him. My city of Montpelier experience was not a very productive one. I contacted a number of people in city government who panned the idea. The Montpelier Historical Society was moribund. There was a Montpelier History Commission which dealt mainly with preserving buildings. No one seemed to be interested, and at times seemed downright hostile. After several attempts to get people to think that a US senator and abolitionist, having lived in the middle of downtown Montpelier, might be something worthy of note, I gave up for a while. By this time, I was traveling around the state, going to history museums, and started to notice these green signs commemorating important events in Vermont history. At first, I thought you'd have to be really important to get on one of those things, and they remained in the back of my mind. But my frustration at not being able to get anywhere with the William Upham issue caused me to notice that there were actually quite a few of those signs, and not every single one was of earth-shattering importance. that's the beginning of it. So where do we exactly do we go from here?
Can you sort of describe what we had to do in order to put the application together? How do we get to this point?
We don't have the little blurb on William Upham's biography, do we? So the next step, after I became convinced that putting William Upham on a marker or applying for a marker was a good thing to do, we had to figure out who sponsored, who was the agency that sponsored the markers, what the process was, what the criteria was. So I went to the Department of Historic Preservation, is the department that sponsors markers. We went and got an application. We had requirements that we had to do. We had to verify his residence. We had to write out a justification for why we thought William Upham was worthy of commemoration.
And then whether he lived, where he lived.
Yep, got where he lived. Yep. Let's see, what else? We had to do a proposed text. We had to attach arguments to the effect that he was the kind of person they would want to commemorate. We had to give evidence. We had to went to the basement of the city hall to verify the deed to his house, etc. So,
And then let me add that what happened after that was that we put together a folder that had all this information in it, and a copy of this roadside marker program application, which is pretty easy to get. I think it's got to be online at this point. And you just essentially follow the little bullets in that application and do the research that you can, attach the research, and then turn it over to the Department of Historic
right.
Historic Preservation, and they will give it to a committee. That's the next step.
Right. The committee then reviews the application, and then you get a notice back whether or not your application's been accepted. But it was in all three of these cases, William Upham, and William Slade and Clarence Fitch, was pretty much a no-brainer. There really wasn't much question that they were going to be accepted. We did seem to run into turbulence some of the time. I'm not sure that the turbulence was indicative of the process, because the process is actually pretty simple. The Department of Historic Preservation really wants people to do this. They've made it simple so people can do it. I think that when we plugged in to it, I think that they were experiencing some changes of leadership and personnel. So there were, for the first marker anyway, there was some frustration. Yeah, so then, but it was an educational process for us, as well as I think a good product for the community.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out that it took us about 9 years from the start, from when Dan discovered that William Upham actually lived in Montpelier until the installation of the marker. So this just goes to show you that, boy, once Dan gets an idea about something, he does not let it go.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the different parts of William Upham's life. I mean, he was a pretty interesting guy. He was born in Massachusetts. He moved to Vermont in the early 1800s. He was in a farm accident on a cider mill, and he lost one of his hands. I believe in his biography, the community took up a collection for him to be tutored. So he studied, instead of going to regular school, he studied with a couple of tutors. He went to UVM, became a lawyer, and he championed, there we go. he championed a number of causes. He was in the Vermont legislature, and during the time that he was in the Vermont legislature, there was a rebellion in Canada, 1837, and he equated that rebellion against the British Crown with the American Revolution, and he was incensed that the Martin Van Buren presidency wouldn't support the revolution. And so he held a huge rally at the Pavilion Hotel in downtown Montpelier, and got into national politics. He campaigned around the state for William Henry Harrison. He was a Whig at this point. The Whig Party could be considered the progressive party of its day. It was anti-slavery. It was strongly pro-education. It took a stance against the Mexican-American War, in part having to do with their desire not to see slavery extended, but also because it was an early act of one country invading another country, and that incensed a lot of sentiment in the United States about whether or not that was the kind of country we had our own revolution for. Yeah, let me just see if there's any other. So he opposed the Fugitive Slave Act. He introduced resolutions calling for an early end to the war with Mexico, or actually he called for an immediate withdrawal or an early end. And then he promoted the Wilmot Proviso, which stipulated but was defeated that there shouldn't be any extension of slavery into the new territories that were acquired by the Mexican-American War. So yeah, okay. I just want to say that he died. Interestingly, both he and William Slade died just before the Civil War. So it's kind of interesting to think that they had their very strong anti-slavery careers right up to the border of the Civil War, but actually never saw the country split apart. So anyway, the slide. Oh, this is Paul Kate and Dan Bragg. This is the installation of the Clarence Fitch marker. One of the things that we ran across twice in our effort was that frequently the powers that be would get the marker and then they wouldn't install it for various reasons. In this case, I think it was because the marker came in close to the end of November, and the town was getting ready to plow roads and get its act together in that regard, and they just didn't have time to do it. So Paul and I decided to do it, and because we just didn't want to wait, and so we had a good time. We had a really good time doing it. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we managed to get it done. There's a funny photograph in my photo gallery of we dug this deep hole to put it in, and in a swamp, yeah. And I was getting down in the hole to get the last bunch of water out of the hole, and Paul dropped a bag of cement into the hole at the same time that I was doing it, and so the photograph captures this huge puff of cement debris coming up out of the hole, and it looks like my head is blowing up. But that's not what actually happened. But I don't know if Paul's in on this Zoom or not. But I just want him to remember that. I just want him to know that I remember doing that, and I had a really good time doing it.
Oh, Clarence Fitch.
Yeah, it's Clarence Fitch. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Clarence Fitch, of course, is a relative of ours. He was born in Calais in 1975. He died in 1968. He was community leader and farmer, and he was a Vermont legislator. And he was a strong leader in the Vermont cooperative movement. And we actually don't have a full representation of all the things that he did as a cooperative leader. but I can just remember that he was the president of the Vermont Credit Union Association. He was the president of the Adamant Credit Union. He was the Vermont Creamery. What was the creamery? The Vermont Cooperative Creamery. And several different honors that he had in the cooperative movement. What have I left out? Is that pretty good, or let me see?
Now, when we were looking for sites, Dan, why did we choose the co-op?
Well, it wasn't just that we chose the co-op. It was that the co-op was very particular about their surroundings, and they weren't super sure that they wanted a sign right adjacent to their building, and it resided on the porch for quite a little while. And they weren't also sure, I don't think, that they wanted somebody from an official from Montpelier, imposing a sign. So we had to go get the permission from a private landowner to put the sign on. But it worked out fine. It was actually it was better. It was better to have it where it was. So sometimes when you get pushback, or you get people going, well, I'm not really quite sure this is what we want, the net result ends up being the best choice anyway.
And I would add to that one of the important things about the site is that, after the marker is approved, you always have to deal with where to put it, and there always are particular issues that have to do with that placement. And
Right.
it's not a surprise. I mean, when the upper marker was approved, the Inn at Montpelier, the people that owned the Inn at Montpelier at that time were not very happy about the idea that it might end up on their lawn, because they were
Right.
concerned about liability issues.
Right.
Finally, it actually, if you notice it when you're driving up Main Street in Montpelier, where it is in the strip of land that the city owns.
Right.
So,
It's always going to be on city-owned property.
except that in
or in town.
Adamant it wasn't.
Or you could get permission, but for the most part, I don't even know if they know that or not.
What?
I don't even know if the state knows that it's on private property, because
Uh-oh.
Paul and I put it in, so it's the
Never
state.
mind.
The state owns the marker, and they take full account and responsibility for whatever happens to it, the maintenance of it, whatever. They're supposed to take responsibility for the installation of it, but they own it, and it's normally speaking, it's on public property.
Right.
There is a funny story connected to the upper marker,
Another funny story.
which is that once again there seemed to be like a ton of delays. It's possible that once I get into a project, I'm a bit impatient. I'm not sure, but I was given an idea of when the marker was going to arrive, and it didn't arrive, and it didn't arrive, and it didn't arrive. And then at one point the pole arrived, but the sign didn't come with it. So a friend of mine, Andy Harris, and I jumped into his truck and went down to the what's the homestead?
The Morrill Homestead.
No, not Morrill. Oh boy.
Was it?
No,
Oh,
not
no,
just
Morrill.
no, not Justice Smith Morrill. It was not Chittenden either. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I can't remember what it is. Well, anyway, down in toward Bethel, and we picked up the pole, we brought it back up, we actually dug the hole, and we put this pole in the ground without a sign on it, as a reminder to the town that we had need for a sign on top of a pole in the middle of Montpelier. And then eventually, of course, we got our sign. They did end up putting the sign on, but it was quite an adventure actually digging this hole and putting the sign in. So
Well, it's not exactly a total oddity because the way that the marker application goes is that it's the responsibility of the applying entity to take care of the securing the site and digging the hole and
Right.
putting the pole in, and then the state actually owns the marker. So a cooperative effort, if you will.
Right. Right.
Okay.
If there's any information that oh yeah, one of the things we wanted to, I guess I probably didn't say was that Clarence Fitch actually started the Adamant co-op store. I don't know.
Why Clarence Fitch?
What?
Why
Yeah,
Clarence Fitch?
Why Clarence Fitch?
Why did you think Clarence Fitch was such a good idea?
Oh, I see, because he started the store. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah,
there
that's-
you
yeah,
go.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. See, that's why we have this collaborative effort going on.
It wasn't because I'm related.
I see.
It was part of
Okay.
it, but how is mom related?
Grandfather.
Oh, well.
Oh, I did, okay, but I said he was a family member. Clarence Fitch was Martha's grandfather.
And it wasn't my idea, it was Dan's idea. So, okay, William Slade.
Okay, so William Slade, probably the most impressive guy in this group. He was born in 1786. He went to local schools in Middlebury. He went to Middlebury College. He studied law, and graduated, and then went into the practice of law at 1810. But he was a seriously public spirited guy. He wrote the laws of. Let me just hang on here for a second. He published the Vermont State Papers, 1824. That's all of Vermont's official records. And he was a clerk to the U.S. State Department, 1823 to 1829. He was a judge, 1816, 1822. He edited a newspaper, the Columbia Patriot. He was a pretty political guy. And he went to Congress in 1831. And at some point in the time that he was at Congress, he saw slaves being sold in chains. And it really floored him. He couldn't believe it. And he became a champion of anti-slavery. He started petitioning for the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia. And probably his main claim to fame, his leading accomplishment, was surrounding the gag rule controversy, which was a measure in the U.S. House that was in operation from 1835 to 1844. And it basically denied anyone the right to petition, to deliver petitions to the U.S. Congress, or to talk about slavery in the House of Representatives. Couldn't talk about it at all. So during the 1830s, Americans were becoming quite aware of the injustice of slavery. They started sending thousands of petitions to the House of Representatives. And sending petitions back then was actually something that was a little more common then than it is now, because petitioning the government for redress of grievances was considered to be a central right and a central way of getting the federal government to account for things that were not right. So Congress was being inundated by anti-slavery petitions, and the South was getting more and more aggravated. And the South at that point had lots of Northern allies. There was a vote in Congress on the question of the gag rule that had all members were in favor of the gag rule on one side, and there were only 9 people against the gag rule on the other side, and 3 of those 9 were from Vermont. And 3 were from Massachusetts, and the other 3 were scattered throughout the rest of the country. So at this point in time, Vermont plays a pretty huge role in the anti-slavery movement. So anyways, William Slade's role in this was that he basically nearly triggered this entire controversy, because in the beginning of things, people who were against slavery didn't really come right out and oppose it. They didn't like it. They wanted to see it go away, but they weren't willing to take a stand against it. So William Slade basically made the early speeches that caused the South to get up in arms about the controversy. I'm going to actually read this so we get the full picture. So the gag rule controversy went from 1835 to 1844. It was basically about the right to petition Congress to end or limit slavery in some way, but also involved broader questions about the right of petition and free speech more generally. It involved intense political rhetoric bordering on physical violence. It was not a standing house rule, so it had to be renewed every single year to go into effect, which made each new session a scene of violent controversy. In the 1830s, Northerners were becoming more and more aware of the injustices of slavery. They started inundating Congress with thousands of anti-slavery petitions. Southerners and Northern allies were outraged, deeming slavery to be protected by the Constitution, though many petitions limited themselves to areas of exclusive federal authority. Eventually, the House passed a rule prohibiting the receiving of any slavery petitions or talking about slavery in any way. And William Slade made many of the earliest speeches that launched the gag rule controversy. That was basically the bulk of his career in Congress, and it's very difficult, I think, to describe because the United States was careening toward a final breakdown of the government into the Civil War. And it's difficult to describe the violent rhetoric that was going on between the two sides. Eventually, later on in the decades, members of Congress were actually bringing guns to Congress to defend themselves against possible attack from the other side. Wendell Phillips Stafford. So Wendell Phillips Stafford, I'm just going to try just move this over a little bit so I can read that part. Yeah, well. Okay. In 1909, on the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth and the heyday of lynching in America, he joined W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida Wells, and Jane Addams, and John Dewey, and 59 others in the founding of the NAACP. He was born in 1861. His grandfather was an ardent abolitionist in Boston. He was the vice president of the Boston Abolitionist Society. His father moved to Vermont later on, but he was also an abolitionist. And Wendell Phillips Stafford was named after Wendell Phillips, who was a really famous anti-slavery orator who was pretty connected to William Lloyd Garrison. Stafford was a monumental scholar. He was a poet, and he studied law in Boston College, graduated and studied law with a law degree. His career goes up and down the scale. He was in the Vermont Supreme Court, I believe, but he also did local things, like he made the dedication speech for the Robert Burns statue in Barrie. He did the dedication for the Aldrich Library. But his main claim to fame was a very militant and persistent champion for racial justice around the country. Some of it, he made a speech at Cooper Union that was seriously strident, but he probably stands out in his day. It was not a great time in American history for African American rights and for equality, and he certainly stands out in American history as somebody who's kind of went his own way in that regard.
So if we were gonna go ahead and try to apply for a marker here, we would have to figure out what, or have to determine what an appropriate site would be. And it could, it could be somewhere on the Aldrich Library's grounds. It could be at the History Center, which is the old Spalding High School ground. But that would have to be checked out with the people that own the building now, or that take care of the buildings now. It would have to be a safe place, so that if somebody wanted to pull off the street and actually look at the marker, it would have to be approved as a safe spot to be. And then all of the other issues that we've run into, which have included actually putting the site where it needs to go. Who is going to be doing that?
Right.
With that, normally it would be the sponsoring organization, but in a situation where a private person is doing the applying, which was the case in the Upham marker, that means that person has to get his friends together, like Dan did, and put the marker in place.
So there is some chance that when we get a minute, that Wendell Phillips Stafford might be our next victim on a green sign.
Oh, boy. Let's see. Whoops, plant, wait.
We
what was
kind of did that
here,
already.
Dan? We can't read it, but, oh yeah, this is your reading.
Yep. I don't need to say that. Right?
Nope.
You want to read my reading list out loud?
No, just
Say what it is.
say what it is.
All right. Well, this is some of the books that I read. It's not the whole list by any means, but George Perkins' Marsh by David Lowenthal, Prophet of Conservation. Fantastic biography of Marsh, very scholarly. It basically does the gamut of Vermont history from 1800 to 1870s, and it's full of detail. It uses George Perkins Marsh's life as a vehicle to discuss the politics of the day, the issues of the day. And of course, Marsh was the first environmentalist, known environmentalist in American history. He was a tremendous polymath and scholar. He taught himself 20 languages. A Vermonter, very well worth knowing. And quite honestly, I don't know that there is an actual site marker dedicated to Marsh, but he probably is in my opinion, one of the outstanding human beings in Vermont history.
Yeah, but what about the Marsh Billings
You're right. His family owned the Marsh Billings
estate?
estate. It's not very much like what it was when he was there, but that property was owned by his father before Vermont became a state, before the Revolutionary War.
Okay.
Arguing about slavery, a fantastic account of the gag rule. It's limited to the gag rule, but it encompasses a whole lot of anti-slavery subject matter with that vehicle, with the gag rule vehicle. It talks a lot about William Slade. Says a number of very, very complimentary things about Vermont and its anti-slavery posture. But it's a super educational read. I'd never heard of the gag rule at all before I read it. Highly recommended. Business of May Next was about James Madison and the founding and the writing of the Constitution. Political Culture of the American Whigs, another really packed book by Daniel Walker Howe. It's full of minutia. I mean, if you like history, you can't put it down. And once you've read that book, it's not super long. It will have highly developed your view of American history, in my opinion.
Are we done?
Justice Smith Morrill, one of my favorite Vermonters. A short but serviceable book by Coy Cross. Morrill, I'm sure everybody knows that Morrill started the land grant college system. He has a homestead that's preserved and a museum that people visit in Stratford. Thomas Chittenden, Vermont's first statesman, again, another very serviceable book, and as far as I know, the only book on Thomas Chittenden, but it's very, very good. Revolutionary Outlaws by Ethan Allen, not by Ethan Allen, but about Ethan Allen by Michael Belisis. Interesting story about Michael Belisis. This book was good. This book was very good. But Michael Belisis was a strong anti-gun person. And he set out to prove that the Second Amendment was not what it was, how we were interpreting it. And he purported to go into deep minutia with newspapers and information of the day, very obscure stuff, and to ferret out language that would prove that how the Supreme Court had been using the Second Amendment was not correct, and he wrote a book on it. But one of the very few services I think that the National Rifle Association ever did, they pursued his research, and they found a lot of it was wrong. And he became seriously discredited. He was a history professor at Emory College. He ran history committees, and he was fired from all of his positions. But he made a very credible comeback several years later in another book that he wrote. But that happens in history, so watch out for him sometimes. Hands of the Land by Jan Albers, very good book. The Age of Federalism, and another serviceable book by Ralph Ketchum on James Madison.
So, questions?
Yes, questions.
I guess I'd point out two things. One is if you have a question, you'll need to unmute yourself. And also, if you don't want to speak, you can click on the chat button and type a question in the chat.
Could I just say a couple of little closing things too? We had a number of struggles getting this together, and a number of frustrations along the way. But I believe that on balance, that the roadside marker program is very user-friendly. It really does. I hope that some of these things indicate that it's very serviceable to the community to know and understand this stuff. Along the way, I think especially with the William Slade marker, I had a great connection to Laura Trishman, who runs but she's in charge of the state historic, what is it?
Division of Historic Preservation.
Yeah, Division of Historic Preservation. She was a great person to work for or with. We collaborated closely back and forth on text. And we had a dedication for the Fitch marker that she helped us out with. And also dedications are good. Dedications extend the influence of your effort, because you get people to come, share, and hear speeches about a marker. It gets that word farther out. Yes. I can't hear you. Andy?
Let's see. We're going change my view here so I can see who's was somebody asking a question? Oh,
Teresa?
Teresa,
Yes.
you need to unmute yourself before you ask the question.
Andy, I think you can unmute her.
Let's see. Okay, yeah. Try unmuting now, Teresa.
Thank you.
There you go.
How much does the what's the physical cost of the monument and the pole?
It's not, the bill is footed by the state. And I can't remember, I can't remember what the cost is. It's probably pretty pricey. It has to go to a foundry and get made. And I don't know that the foundry is a very big fish. And I think that Vermont's historic site marker program is probably a small part of it, which is maybe why we took so long sometimes to get our signs back. But the state does the whole thing. So yeah, you don't have to, there's no money out of your pocket or anybody's pocket.
I'm not worried about how much. I'm just curious,
Yeah, I can't remember. I can't remember what it was.
How was the digging?
What's that?
How was the digging?
It was in adamant. It was muddy. We had to dig the hole down a certain ways. Oh yeah, I forgot. That's right. There was a big old rock at the bottom. In fact, there was more than one big old rock, and a lot of water was coming in. So Paul and I, dug down through one big rock and got it out of there. And when we got to the next one, which was right underneath the first one, we thought we'd gone far enough. We figured that the rock was going to anchor the sign plenty. So we just put, a little extra cement in and left the rock alone. But it was fun. I'll tell you something though, if you think that you're doing something that people are going to get a lot out of, it's well worth doing. If that's the route you have to go.
Dan, I have a question.
Yes.
Well, sort of two. Is there a list like on the state Division of Historic Preservation of who all the markers?
Yeah, there is.
Yes.
There's a website.
And are there some women who have been acknowledged?
Not very many.
Let's see. Yes, but you're right. Not anywhere near as many. There's Jemima Toot down in Pownell, who lost 3 husbands during the French and Indian War. There was a little activity. There was a little military activity in southern Vermont during the French and Indian War. There were blockhouses. There was Fort Dummer. She was kidnapped and taken to Canada. Yeah, there is quite a little story behind her life. And then one of my favorites, oh boy, I apologize because, I haven't been 68 very long, but I have been for a little while, and names really do skip my attention. There was a really cool woman, you know who I'm talking about, Clarina Nichols. She was another abolitionist. She was from Brattleboro. She had a very abusive husband, and she championed divorce as a route that people could go, and that was, of course, something that never happened back then or seldom happened. She became a very strong feminist. She petitioned the legislature to allow women to vote on school issues, which they declined to allow it to happen. She went with her sons to, I believe, Kentucky. But she was in Vermont for quite a while, and she was, she championed a number of causes, including women's rights and abolitionism.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Sandal?
Yes,
Sandal, or
yes,
somebody?
Ann.
Can I make a statement?
Certainly.
Marilyn Blackwell wrote a biography of Clarina Nichols.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I'd like to get. You know,
It's very worth reading.
I will definitely take that in. I think, it's interesting that in a sense, Vermont has been a bit of a backwater for scholarship. So the way you find out about William Slade is basically to read about John Quincy Adams, and who's a major national figure. And Adams was heavily involved in the gag rule controversy, and Slade is mentioned in conjunction with that, but he doesn't have his own biography. And many of these guys don't have their own biographies, even though their lives are certainly, it's possible that a lot about William Upham is just simply lost to history because he only has biographical sketches in Congress. So Vermont really needs an upgrade, I think, in scholarship.
I was thinking, Dan, there's another resource that people around here might be interested in, is the Rokeby Museum over in
Oh,
Fairfield,
yeah.
which
Yeah.
had a very close connection to East Montpelier.
Yeah.
And over there, they have books that were in the East Montpelier Abolitionist Library. And they have pictures of prominent citizens of East Montpelier in a photo album because Roland Robinson, the author, his wife came from East Montpelier, and
Right.
The Quakers that were in Ferrisburg and those that are in East Montpelier worked together on abolitionist issues. So,
Yep.
The archive. Or this was one other thing, was the archive of the letters that are exchanged are in the Middlebury archive.
Yes. Yeah. It's just really interesting. I grew up in East Montpelier. I never knew that there was an abolitionist library in East Montpelier. And one of the things that that strikes me about all this and the work that we did and other research that we've done is, why are not some of these people like William Slade, or, well, for example, when they proposed at the town meeting that they have an historic marker for William Slade, very few people had ever heard of him, who he was. And the Wendell Phillips, he was a national figure. He made speeches all over the country. Why don't Vermonters know more about these people? They're instructive, and they're super beneficial to the community, and to understanding our definition as a country. And to not know them, to not have them available, it just seems to me to be shooting yourself in the foot.
Well, maybe now's a good time for everybody to unmute and clap for Dan. I think we can hear that.
I hope we were able to give people some good information.
I'm wondering, are there any of those markers in East Montpelier?
I was thinking, well, yes, there is one. There's one at the Singing Bridge.
Bragg Farm? You want it to Bragg Farm?
We haven't been dead 50 years yet. But who knows? I was thinking that there should be one at the Park and Ride down in the village. It could include the Quakers. It could include East Montpelier's commitment to being an agrarian community. It could include the Quakers and their library. It could include the fact that the church in East Montpelier village had the very first ordained woman minister. And it could also include the artist community that you were telling me about, Andy, up at the wheat farm. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Very famous artists, came there as a respite, I think. And they had a connection to the Adamant School of Music, I think. I'm not sure about that, but.
No, that's true too.
So East Montpelier's got enough information and enough interesting stuff to clearly, certainly qualify to have a marker.
or more.
Or
more
yeah,
than
yeah,
one.
you probably have to have two. One of the things that we did with the Slade marker was that we had the front of the marker about Slade's biography, and then the back of the marker was dedicated to the gag rule controversy and what that was about. So that was a double whammy. That was a good way of informing people if you have different things on each side of the marker.
You know where the only Vermont marker out of Vermont is located?
Outside of Vermont?
Yeah,
I do not know.
Cedar Creek.
Oh, really?
I've been there.
We were there for the dedication. And
Oh, wow, that's
it was,
cool.
it was very moving. Real good show.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, and I want to just say that I think, did Howard Coffin plug into that?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
spoke. He spoke
He did.
there, and Joe
Yeah.
Benning spoke as well.
Well, you know, Howard, I conferred with Howard Coffin when I was running into some turbulence with the William Upham marker. He said he would help me. He is a huge service to Vermont. I read his book, The Battered Stars, and he really has. He had this great interview on Across the Fence about Thaddeus Stevens, who was one of his, you know. So yeah, that's all, but that's great. I wasn't that in danger a little bit. The Cedar Creek battleground, wasn't there some controversy about they were thinking about like developing that area or something?
Oh yeah,
And-
yeah, there, and another one too, maybe Appomattox, or I can't remember, but
Right.
Dollars under pressure.
yeah, just
Yeah.
need another Walmart, you know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Not enough of them. Yep. Well, Andy and I were having a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and we were referencing that phrase, that saying that people that forget history are doomed to repeat it, which is true. But there is a corollary to that too, which is if you forget the good history that you produce, if you forget the good people that you produce, then you're unable to repeat the good work that they did, because your work is going to be built on, you know, on their accomplishments. So I'm certainly, yeah, I'm glad. I didn't know there was a marker there, and I'm really happy to hear it.
Yep.
Are there any other questions for Dan? Any announcements that anybody needs to make?
I have not really a question, but I just want to say thank you for doing this. This is really interesting. My sister and I are doing the 251 Club.
Oh,
And
wow.
one of the things we're doing is we're going to every one of the historical markers. So this has been really fascinating.
For you, congratulations. That is a really, really good idea. I may ask you to take some photographs. I'm trying to put together a collage of, although Martha's
Well,
saying
we've been taking photos at every one that we've been to. So
oh,
far,
that's
we've
great.
only done Windham County.
Well, Martha said I can't paste any more of the walls in our house with photographs of historic markers. So I got to figure out a different way of doing it. But I really want, I would, yeah, if you were willing to share some, I'd be happy to have them.
Well, from now on, I'll have to take pictures with neither of us in them because so far we're in all of them.
That's not a problem. I got some pictures with goofy
You
ones
could-
with friends in them too. So
You could start a club by the 252 Club.
the 252 markers, you mean? Or
Well, however many there are.
there's pretty close. There was pretty close to that. There may be a little bit more than that now.
There's not one in every town, we
No.
found out.
No, there's not, but there's several, and some towns have several.
Yes.
And one of the questions that I was running around in my head is, how many site markers would you need to have in a given location to give a passerby, a traveler, an interested person, a decent idea of what that location was about? You know, you could probably end up having too many, I suppose. But it would be interesting to to think about how you could use these things as instructive vehicles if you had enough available.
Dan, do you have an idea of how many other people might currently be thinking along the same lines you have been, you know, in this day and age in terms of generating more markers?
I don't know of anybody else that's done 3 besides me.
No, there is one guy that I know.
Has done, okay. But what I did early on in the game, I talked to Laura Trishman about the idea of having an informal standing committee of people who are interested in doing research to ferret these people out and make proposals for site markers. And she took it to the committee, and they approved of doing that. So, but things interfered, and I couldn't follow through. And she couldn't follow through on her part either. So we weren't able to really get back to it. But it's possible that we could, the state could, or they could be re-persuaded, especially if there were some more people that came to light they didn't know about, to take a second look at that. And have an organized approach.
My sister and I have, you know, we've talked about it, and we think there must be something in every town so that every town could have one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would be a good goal, to have at least one in every town, because there's got to be something historic in every town that would deserve one.
Yes, I agree. And so it wouldn't take much if you're traveling around from town to town and you run across these very impactful people, you know, well, to instill pride in kids that are growing up, you know. I mean, Vermont played an outsized role in the Civil War, kids growing up. I mean, or champions for, you know, civil rights. Kids need to know that kind of stuff, as do we. But I think one in every town is a good goal to have.
When a town doesn't have any markers, we find something else historic in that town for our photographs. And so there's got to be something in every town that could be commemorated.
Howard Coffin wrote a book called Something Abides. I have not read it myself. My brother has. I've read reviews of it.
We haven't, we're using that as well.
Are you? Right. That's a great manual. And the idea behind it is that he did it's about the great number of Civil War monuments, buildings, grave sites, places are all around Vermont that are hidden, that have been grown over by brush, that have been neglected or forgotten. And he's been all over the state. He's been out in fields, he's been out in the woods, and he's brought all of these sites that were directly related to the Civil War into his book. And it's a pretty major accomplishment.
It is, it's huge. And we've been trying to follow in each town part of his path, because he describes in each town where some soldiers lived, or you know, something significant in each town that's related to the Civil War.
Yeah. There's got to be. I mean, he says that Vermont lost more soldiers per capita than any other state. Lucia usually hits me on the head when I say stuff like that, because she says it depends on the metric that you use to determine that, things like that. But it certainly is true that Vermont played an outsized role, very outsized role, and also played an outsized role in the abolitionist movement. You know, we were certainly in the vanguard of the abolitionist movement, and it's not healthy, I don't believe, for people to not know what sacrifices others have made in those ways.
Well, I just want to remind folks that A, I think this has worked out well, and B, we're going to have another go at it on our normal meeting day, and you'll see announcements. In November on the 15th, we'll have Nathan Phillips, who's got aerial photos of many farms in East Montpelier. But to get Calais on board, I think Juanita maybe will have some stories for us down, in the future. Maybe Juanita, you could work with somebody like Andy or somebody who's fairly good at tech stuff and pull up some of your pictures and share some of your stories. So,
Oh, well, we were just getting started. We've only done Wyndham County so far,
yeah, but still,
but we're going to continue.
yeah, and it sounds like you'll probably have a lot of stories, but for an evening program, you only need to focus on, a good handful of things. So I may, I'll send you a note.
Okay.
Because we're trying to also, balance between Calais folks and East Montpelier folks. So
I have an aerial photo of where I live from the 60s. If I can find it, I will see if I can scan it and send it to you.
okay, or to Nathan Phillips if you can, or you can check with me for his,
Okay.
whatever.
Hopefully I can.
Thank you, Sandal. Thank you, Dan.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
I'm going to put my tech hat on for a moment and say that since this has been recorded, if people would like to see this, a recording of this, you could just let us know. We can make it available to you. I know that might be particularly of particular interest to those who have low bandwidth in their connection, or had any issues that you might have run into. The other thing I was thinking, since Sandal's frozen, I'll say one more thing, is that it might be interesting if you want to let us know how this experience went. As I said, this was the first time that we've tried to do this over the internet, and it might be helpful to get some feedback. And we can just to get a rough idea of how it went.
I would personally, I wonder, I don't know if it would be gauche for me to ask, but I would be like to get, constructive criticism, critique. I may, I'm moving toward retirement, may want to do this as a semi-profession after I'm done working. And I'd love to get feedback, both negative and positive, if anybody's interested in doing that.
Is there any other questions? Sounds like we may have reached the end of this meeting.
Okay.
I'm afraid, looks like Sandal disappeared, so I guess I will announce that we'll end this meeting now, and hopefully we'll see you. Let's see, I guess it's next month. You'll get notices about Nathan Phillips' presentation.
Yeah.
And we'll have that on Zoom as well. Thank you for coming, and hope you have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
Dan.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Ann.
You.
Good to see you, Norma.
Oh, good to see you.
Norma.
Most of you, Norma.
Trying to figure out how to get out of here.
You can't, Norma. It's forever. You have to stay.
You just sit here and face each other.
Yeah, if you want to leave the meeting, there's a red button, I believe, on your view in the lower right-hand corner that says end.
I'm gonna have to, but I don't want to.
Mine
Oh.
says leave.
Actually, that's something you might, I might throw one more question out to people. When you respond, if you have ideas about this meeting, there is the possibility in Zoom to have breakout meetings. So another possibility open to us is that we can create breakout rooms, and we could have people meet in smaller groups and then come back to the larger group. So something to think about in our future presentations.
Sounds confusing.
Yeah, we figured we'd keep it simple this first meeting.
I think you did very well.
Hey,
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
I know.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Andy.
Bye, Dan.
Bye.
I just got a message from Pastor Herb.